My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm 52 years old. That day was supposed to be the happiest of my life. The day my daughter Chloe graduated with a master's degree in top honors. Family, friends, and loved ones gathered at a beautiful upscale restaurant in the heart of Charleston. I had prepared everything, down to the smallest detail, the way any mother would when her child achieves something big. But when my husband, Douglas Hayes, the man I'd spent nearly 3 decades with, stood up to raise a glass, he didn't congratulate our daughter. He announced that he was leaving me to begin an inspired new life. And then, a woman stood up from the corner table, placed her hand on my husband's shoulder, and said, "Let's tell them the truth. Have you ever been betrayed in public? Given your whole life to someone, only to be discarded like a shadow? Leave a comment if you know that feeling." Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, because this isn't a story about divorce, it's a fight to reclaim myself. I used to be a financial specialist with a CFA designation. I had been invited to join the strategic team of a leading investment firm in Atlanta. But at 27, when Douglas sat on my old couch, held my hand, and said, "I have an idea that will change our lives forever," I set my career aside to help him build that dream. We moved to Charleston, where his parents owned an old piece of land by the marsh. Douglas wanted to turn it into a new, eco-friendly residential area. He threw himself into drawing plans, learning architecture design, and calling investors late into the night. As for me, I printed documents, built financial plans, worked part-time at a local bank, and used my evenings to monitor cash flow, loan interest rates, and property taxes. The first time Douglas failed was when an investor backed out at the last minute. He lost $200,000 in capital. I didn't blame him. I quietly pulled money from my personal savings account, the money my parents had left me, to help him pay off the bank debt. No one knew. Not even Chloe. I told her I was using the money to fix the roof, that Mom had to tighten her purse for a little while. The second time, Douglas tried again by launching a small chain of real estate offices. I helped him set up financial systems and taught myself the business tax laws in South Carolina to make sure he didn't run into the same trouble. But it took only 18 months for the business to fall apart, brought down by mismanagement and a lawsuit from an old partner. As for me, I kept working part-time, later switching to freelance so I could take care of Chloe when she entered high school. Chloe was an incredible kid, smart, kind, and deeply attached to her dad. Every time Douglas was away for work, Chloe would draw him pictures and sign them, "To Dad, my hero." I didn't blame anyone. Truly, I told myself, this is life, everyone has a role. Douglas was the dreamer. I was the one who kept things steady. Whenever someone asked why I hadn't pursued my own career, I would smile and say, "I'm making a long-term investment. In my husband. In my child. In our family." One time, my mother came to visit and saw me fixing Douglas's accounting records at 2 a.m. She stayed quiet for a long time, then said softly, "Sweetheart, sometimes sacrifice needs conditions." I smiled and changed the subject. I didn't think she understood. My mother had been widowed at 38. She was strong, cold, and never let anyone lean on her. But I believed that love meant weathering storms together. Someone had to step back so the other could move forward. But sometimes I wondered, if I kept stepping back, would I disappear from my own life? I remember clearly when Douglas came to me while Chloe was hospitalized with pneumonia. He said, "Don't worry, I'll handle everything at the office, you just take care of her." I stayed in that hospital for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, but on the 4th night I ran home to grab some clothes. The light in the home office was still on. Douglas was slumped over the desk, his head buried in messy reports. I stepped in, about to ask if he needed anything, when I heard him mumble to himself, "I can't keep depending on her forever." His voice nearly broke. At the time, I thought it was guilt speaking, a man struggling with pride after failing. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. He jolted, then gave a weak smile. "I've got a few things to finish here, you should get some sleep." I didn't press. And I didn't know that in that moment he had already started withdrawing from me, not through action but through subtle distance. Stories he stopped telling, phone calls where I was no longer the first to know. Still, I believed I was doing the right thing. Chloe needed stability. Douglas needed support. I had grown used to being the steady woman in the family, and it seemed like everyone else was used to it too. So, no one asked if I was tired. Once, I asked Douglas for a small share of capital to start a financial consulting service for women navigating post-divorce independence, an idea I had been working on for 6 months. He smiled and said, "That's a great idea, but you should wait a few more years once Chloe graduates. If you start now, I won't be able to focus." I folded the business plan and placed it in a drawer. I told myself I'd wait a little longer. But I didn't realize the person I was waiting for had no intention of waiting for me. 3 months before Chloe's graduation, I was in the kitchen making coffee, like every morning, when Douglas walked in looking uneasy. He placed a stack of papers on the table and said, "Here's the bank statement you needed for last month's tax file. I printed it out." I nodded, thanking him, my hands still wet from rinsing mugs. He rushed off, saying he had an early client meeting downtown. I hadn't planned to check it immediately, but after drying my hands and picking up the stack, I realized it wasn't a bank statement. It was a copy of a real estate deposit contract for a lakefront house north of Charleston. Full address, preliminary design plan, and a down payment close to $40,000. I frowned and turned to the second page. The listed owners were Douglas Hayes and Avery Lynn. I stood frozen in the kitchen. A drop of coffee fell onto the back of my hand, but I didn't feel it. The name Avery Lynn had never come up in my life, at least not in any clear way. But the way her name appeared next to my husband's on a shared property, it couldn't be an innocent mistake. I didn't call Douglas, didn't question him, didn't slam the table or tear the papers like in some movie. I calmly folded the documents, placed them in an envelope, and locked them in the small filing cabinet in the office, one Douglas never touched. That night, I watched him more closely. He still chatted with Chloe, asked about her thesis, about which company she'd choose after graduation. He still looked at me and smiled when I brought the lasagna to the table. But the smile I gave back that night, it was the first one I had to force in this entire marriage. I started with something small, checking all the joint bank accounts again. I had always been the one managing our household finances, but since Douglas launched his new company, he had separated the business account, saying it was to keep things professional. I agreed, not because I fully trusted him, but because I was too exhausted to micromanage everything like before. But now I went back through every line of every statement, every payroll record, every credit card transaction. In a single evening, I found 3 regular transfers, once a month, to an account not listed under our family name. The amounts weren't large, but they were consistent, $2,400 on the 7th of every month. I began to suspect that this wasn't just a passing affair, but a long-term plan. The next day, I didn't go to my office like I usually did. Instead, I met with an old friend, Martha DeLuca, now a private investigator based in Greenville. Martha and I had taken a forensic accounting course together nearly 2 decades ago. I told her a brief version of what I had found, keeping some key details to myself. She looked at me and quietly said, "Lauren, if you need the truth, I'll help, but prepare yourself. The truth might not be gentle." Within 2 weeks, Martha sent me her first summary report. Along with the money transfers, she had traced the recipient account. It belonged to a small investment firm called Lynn and Associates, directed by Avery Lynn, 34 years old, unmarried, with a listed residence in Mount Pleasant. There were photos, too. Avery had red hair, a slender build, and wore a cream-colored dress as she walked beside Douglas at a weekend event. They weren't kissing, no embrace, but Douglas's hand rested lightly on her back, as if it was second nature. I remember the feeling I had holding that photo. Not anger, not jealousy. Something inside me broke, quietly, like an old branch snapped by the wind. One you only realize had cracked long before when it finally falls the next morning. I still said nothing. I went to work, came home, made dinner like always. But at night, after Douglas had fallen asleep, I'd turn on the computer and start building a diagram. Where the money was going, what contracts had been signed, which assets were being prepped for transfer. Then one night when Douglas was having dinner with clients from Atlanta, I went into his office to print last year's tax files. That's when I found a folder, tucked beneath the bottom drawer, with a copy of a newly signed life insurance policy from 2 months ago. Policyholder, Lauren Hayes. Beneficiary, Avery Lynn. I sat frozen for several minutes. Every word on the page reeked of cold calculation. Life insurance. My husband. The same man who once sat beside me in the ER when I nearly lost our child, had now signed a life insurance policy under my name for another woman to receive everything if I died. I don't remember how I walked out of that office, only that I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, hands wrapped tightly around a cold cup of tea, listening to the grandfather clock tick away. I started calculating. Martha called 2 days later. I dug a little deeper. Lauren, Avery used to work at the law office that handled permits for Hayes Living. She left about 3 years ago. They may have known each other even before that. I cut her off. Can you help me pull a list of all assets under Douglas's name, including anything recently transacted within the past year? I can, but what are you planning to do? I looked out the window, where the bougainvillea had begun to wither because I'd forgotten to water it. I'm not going to say anything, I just want to know exactly what's being taken from me. I didn't know whether Douglas suspected I was onto him, but if he did, he hid it well. He still came home on time, still asked where I wanted to travel that summer, still offered to go dress shopping with me for Chloe's graduation. There was only one difference. I no longer looked at him the same way. I looked at him like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unaware he was on sinking sand. And I, the woman he still believed to be clueless, was quietly pulling out every soft cushion beneath his feet. About 3 weeks after I discovered the life insurance policy naming Avery Lynn as the beneficiary, I started digging deeper into the mortgage loans tied to Douglas's company. I didn't think I'd find anything more disturbing. But then I found an unsecured loan contract worth $180,000, signed by both of us, though I had never seen it before. I sat silently for a long time, staring at the screen. My name, Lauren M. Hayes, was signed right next to Douglas's, in neat soft handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't mine. At the bottom was a note verifying the signatures had been confirmed directly via video call. I checked my schedule for the date the loan was signed. I had been in Asheville visiting my mother who had dislocated her shoulder. I had doctor notes and train tickets to prove it. There was no way I had agreed to this loan. And at that moment I knew. Douglas had forged my signature. This wasn't infidelity, it was legal fraud. Deception. I printed out the contract, my hands shaking as I held each page. Not from fear, but from a betrayal so deep it felt like bone-level erosion. For years I had signed many loans on Douglas's behalf, but never imagined he'd one day forge my name to borrow such a large amount behind my back. I shared what I found with Nancy, my best friend of 15 years and my maid of honor at our wedding. Nancy lived in the same neighborhood and had seen it all, from our strained dinners to Douglas's frequent late nights. I invited her over, made tea like always, then handed her the file. You know my signature, right, Nancy? Can you look at this? She glanced at it, frowning. It really does look like yours. But something's off. Like someone tried to copy it. I didn't sign it, I was in Asheville that day. Nancy set her teacup down, looked at me for a long time, then exhaled. Are you sure Douglas did this? Maybe the bank clerk made a mistake? My throat tightened. Are you doubting me? Nancy hesitated, then whispered. Not doubting you, Lauren, I want to believe Douglas wouldn't go that far. A few days later, I called Elena, a friend from our church prayer group, one of the few people who used to visit our house during the holidays. I needed someone to witness my civil complaint, and someone to hear the truth. Elena arrived nearly 40 minutes late without calling ahead. As soon as she sat down, she sighed. Mired. Are you sure you want to make this a big deal? What do you mean? I'm only saying everyone knows Douglas has made a few mistakes, but are you really going to tear the whole family apart at this age? Chloe's about to graduate. Do you want her to see her parents in a legal battle? I stayed quiet for a moment. You're right. Chloe shouldn't have to see this. Then maybe you should let it go. No, I raised my head and looked straight into Elena's eyes. Chloe doesn't deserve to see it. But I don't deserve this either. That's when I knew I was truly on my own. For weeks afterward, the calls from friends slowed down. Coffee meetups were rescheduled. Weekend texts vanished. I had the feeling Douglas had said something to them. Maybe he told them I was unstable, paranoid. Maybe he said I was having a midlife crisis. Everything became clear when my mother-in-law called, a woman who rarely got involved, but always managed to make you feel like you owed her peace. Lauren, I heard you're worried about some money matters. I answered politely. Yes, ma'am. There were a few suspicious transactions. I'm reviewing them. You should be careful. Douglas is a businessman after all. Not every figure is going to be perfectly tidy. But honestly, are you sure you're not imagining things a little too much? I lowered my voice. Mom, Douglas took out a major loan under my name without my consent. Lauren, listen to me. Everyone makes mistakes now and then. I'm just afraid you'll blow this up and lose your whole family. At your age, family is the most precious thing you have. Family is the most precious thing. I used to believe that. But I was starting to understand. Not everything called family is truly a safe place. The final blow came from Chloe. I had kept her in the dark through everything, not wanting to affect her studies. But then I began to sense a distance. She texted less, our calls felt rushed, and for the first time in 3 months, she canceled our lunch. Without warning. I called her back. Chloe picked up, her voice slightly off. Mom, I'm sorry. I got stuck at the library longer than I thought. That's okay, sweetie. I wanted to make sure you're all right. Yeah, I'm fine. By the way, Dad said you've been a bit sensitive lately? He said you've been stressed about money, digging through paperwork. I mean, are you okay? I smiled even though she couldn't see it. I'm okay, but sometimes, when someone seems too okay to everyone else, no one believes them when they finally speak up. Chloe was silent. I knew in that moment that in her eyes I was the paranoid mother, and Douglas, calm and composed, saying all the reasonable things, was simply doing what was best for the family. I hung up. I had entered this game, and now I was up against someone who no longer saw me as a partner. He saw me as an obstacle. And I understood one thing clearly. If I wanted to survive this storm, I couldn't rely on emotions alone. I had to return to what used to be my strength. Logic. And everything I had buried over decades of being the wife behind the scenes. After that last conversation with Chloe, I no longer clung to the illusion of waiting for the truth to come out on its own. I made a plan. The first thing I did was contact Tessa Monroe, an attorney specializing in asset protection and marital fraud based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I knew about Tessa from a women's finance seminar I had attended before I got married, back when I thought I'd never need such services. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I sent an email explaining the situation along with the files I had backed up. Within 48 hours, Tessa called me on Zoom. She didn't mince words. Lauren, what you have is more than enough to file a suit and to protect your assets, but you need to act quickly before everything's moved out of your control. I nodded, my hand steady over my notepad. I've been thinking about setting up a trust to transfer any investments under my name. Stocks, inheritance from my parents. Tessa smiled. I can see you don't need much coaching. Do it, now. We established a trust called Harborlight Trust, with Chloe as the primary beneficiary and a small scholarship fund for women re-entering the workforce after divorce. Every asset solely in my name, from the Amazon stock I had held since 2002 to the plot of land my parents left me in Vermont, was transferred there. Legally sound, untouchable from the outside. It felt like I had built a fortress. Quiet, solid. But I knew that was only the first step. I hired a forensic accountant, Carl Jennings, 65 years old, a former internal audit expert for a federal pension fund. Carl wasn't one to talk much, but every word landed like a needle where it mattered. We spent hours reviewing the bank statements Douglas had sent me over the past year. Carl marked suspicious transactions that didn't match their declared purpose with a red pen and said plainly, "There's a money flow being broken up and moved regularly. but it doesn't follow any standard spending pattern. This is a technique often used when someone wants to avoid detection by a bank or the IRS. I asked quietly, could it be money laundering? Do you know a company called Mariner Linvest? I flinched. Yes, the director is Avery Lynn. Carl turned his screen to show a money flow chart. Part of Douglas's transactions are going into that company. It's registered in Delaware, but the funds are held in Belize, then transferred to 3 more accounts under the names of unidentified brokerage investment funds. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had thought Douglas was just cheating, or at worst hiding assets. But now I was sitting here, looking at the financial network of a man possibly involved in illegal investment laundering. Carl continued, his tone still calm. Mariner Linvest is a shell company. No actual operations, no office, no employees, no public financial reports. Companies like this are typically used to pass money back and forth, without direct traceability. I clenched my fists. Maybe Douglas doesn't know, maybe Avery is the one behind it. Carl shook his head gently. A man who authorizes regular transfers every month from 3 separate accounts is not unaware. I stared at the chart. By now, I didn't feel hurt anymore, only cold. Cold from realizing that the man I had shared a bed with for 30 years had turned me into a shield for a financial system built on shadows. Tessa called back as soon as I sent her Carl's findings. Lauren, if you agree, I'll file an emergency motion to freeze assets with the Charleston County Court. At the same time, you'll need to prepare a divorce case with fraud as grounds. I nodded softly. Do it. I've been silent for too long. That night I lay alone in bed, listening to the wind slipping through the cracks in the window, thinking about the nights Douglas used to touch my hair and say, "I'll never leave you alone." I thought about the life insurance policy, about the forged signature, about the woman named Avery Lynn, and what I'd be facing if she wasn't merely the other woman. The night before Chloe's graduation, I spent hours organizing every document, every statement, every printed email from the anonymous account Douglas had used to contact Avery Lynn. Everything was carefully arranged inside a dark blue leather folder, sealed with double zippers, lined with wax paper for moisture protection, like I was safeguarding my own will. That morning, I wore the pale pink dress. Chloe had once said, "Mom, wear that one. You look more like a proud mom than a bank supervisor in it." I drove to the restaurant we had reserved for the celebration dinner, calm as if today truly was only about celebrating my daughter. Douglas arrived a few minutes after me. Same expensive gray suit, same confident stride that had once made me proud in our early years of marriage. And behind him, not unexpectedly, Avery Lynn appeared. Dressed modestly, her gaze no longer avoided mine, unlike the photos I had once seen. I had anticipated everything, but what I hadn't anticipated was that Douglas didn't intend to say anything privately. Amid the clinking of silverware and glasses being filled with wine, Douglas stood up, took the restaurant's microphone and made his announcement as if accepting an award. "Today, I'm here not only to celebrate Chloe's achievements, my daughter, whom I'm very proud of. I also want to share I'm starting a new chapter in my life. A chapter that requires honesty, freedom, and courage." I looked up and slowly laid my napkin across my lap. The eyes from nearby tables began turning toward me. Chloe, seated between me and her father, turned, stammering. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Douglas didn't answer her. Instead, he turned to Avery. She stood up, and as if rehearsed, she smiled and said loudly, "It's time to stop pretending." I opened my purse, pulled out the blue folder, and gently placed it on the table in front of Douglas. "A gift for your new chapter, Douglas." He frowned. What is this?" I didn't answer. I turned to Chloe and spoke softly. "No matter what happens today, I want you to know I've always been proud of you. What I'm doing, it's not out of hate. It's because I can't stay silent anymore." I squeezed her hand, then walked out of the celebration. I could feel 1,000 eyes following me like pins in my back. But I didn't lower my head. I heard Douglas call out behind me, "Lauren, what are you doing?" I didn't look back. That night, Douglas was summoned to the County Financial Investigation Office to respond to several suspicious transactions involving business assets and insurance funds. I didn't need to file the report myself. My attorney had been working with the prosecution for 2 weeks, preparing everything for this exact moment. I was the first to file a civil suit, demanding a full audit of our shared assets, the freezing of all joint accounts, and the temporary suspension of any active investment withdrawals. The next morning, while I was brewing coffee, Chloe walked into the house, without knocking like she usually did. Her eyes were red and puffy, her voice strained. "Mom, what's happening? Is Dad really being investigated? He said you staged all this to destroy him." I pulled out a chair. "Sit down, sweetie. I hadn't planned to drag you into this, but maybe I've been silent for too long." I opened my laptop, switched to the recordings folder, hit play. Douglas's voice filled the room. Crystal clear. From a conversation I had secretly recorded when he was on the phone with Avery in our home office. "You don't need to worry about the money. The life insurance is under Lauren's name, but you're the beneficiary. She doesn't suspect a thing. Everything will process within the limits. Even if she disappears suddenly for any reason." Chloe's eyes widened. "Did Dad really say that?" I gave no reaction. I played the next clip, the one about the Belize account, where Douglas told Avery he had used a shell company to move the money faster. My daughter sat there in stunned silence. Then she whispered, "So, it's all true? He didn't just cheat, he used me as a financial shield." I looked straight into her eyes. "And maybe even put my life at risk." Chloe broke down in tears, not the tears of a child upset, but the cry of someone who had just seen the true face of someone they once believed in completely. She ran to me and held me tight, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I thought you were just being overly sensitive. I believed him." I pulled her close. Outside, the rain had begun to fall. I didn't know how long the storm would last. But at least, the storm inside me had begun to lift. 3 days after Chloe had listened to all the recordings, Douglas showed up at my door. No flowers, no real apology, just a wrinkled coat, a drained face, and a look somewhere between anger and pity. I opened the door and stood there quietly, waiting for him to speak. "Lauren, we need to talk, can we?" I tilted my head, staring straight at the man who used to call me his life partner for nearly 3 decades. "About what, Douglas? The Belize account? The life insurance? Or your plan to use me as a disposable pawn?" He winced like I'd slapped him. "I know you're angry. Avery, she's not who you think she is. She pressured me, Lauren. You don't understand. I just wanted to feel like I still had the right to dream about something." I couldn't help but laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd, coming from the man who once used my dreams as an excuse to dismiss them. And what about me? Was I not allowed to dream, Douglas? Or was it just that my dreams didn't fit your agenda? He looked away. Then his voice turned desperate. "You can't expose everything like this. You know I never meant to hurt anyone. It all got out of hand. If you go public, I could lose everything." I answered calmly. "You didn't lose everything because of me, Douglas. You lost everything because you traded it away, your family, respect, trust, for someone who never deserved it." At that moment, Chloe stepped out from the kitchen. "Mom, Avery's here. I thought if we're going to end this properly, all 3 of us should be present." Douglas spun around. "Chloe, you don't understand. This isn't necessary. You shouldn't." "I need to hear from everyone, Dad, and I think Mom deserves to speak fully. If this was the final battleground of a marriage that had long since died, then I wasn't going to turn away." Avery walked in, her heels clicking lightly on the hardwood floor like she was stepping into a pitch meeting, not a confrontation. She wore an ivory linen dress, holding a half-finished latte. There wasn't a hint of hesitation in her gaze. "Thank you for letting me come, Chloe. I know this isn't easy, but at the very least, I want everything to be out in the open." I didn't take my eyes off her. "And what exactly do you call open? The way you lured in a married man? Or the way you helped him drain money from our joint account?" Avery didn't blink. "I didn't lure anyone. Douglas came to me. I just helped him realize he didn't have to live in a cage anymore." She turned to me. Oh, you see, you were like a supervisor, recording, monitoring, budgeting. Men need to breathe, you suffocated him. Douglas cut in, hurriedly. She didn't mean that to be insulting, Lauren. She only said that because I raised my hand to silence him. I walked to the table, opened my laptop. With a few clicks, I pulled up a photo taken by Martha, the private investigator, Avery, recorded receiving a cash envelope near Douglas's office, less than 2 blocks away. I zoomed in, set the laptop on the coffee table, turning it toward Chloe and Avery. Is this when you were helping Douglas breathe? And this, I clicked into an audio file, is your voice. In a recorded call with Douglas, who doesn't even know she's about to be replaced by her own assets. The room fell silent. Only Avery's uneven breathing filled the space. Her face flushed, but she still tried to stay composed. You had someone follow me? I gathered evidence, something I should have done much earlier, and thank you for making your intentions so clear. Douglas jumped to his feet. Lauren, this has gone too far. You're dragging Chloe into a war she doesn't need. You're blowing up everything to get even. No, Douglas. I'm pulling my daughter out of the trap you built. You used the word family to cover your wrongdoing. You used love as leverage. And you thought I'd keep staying silent, like I did for 30 years? Avery took a step back. Chloe stared, like she was seeing Avery for the very first time. Did you know my father signed a life insurance policy with you as the beneficiary? Avery hesitated. He said it was a precaution. I never asked for anything. Chloe's voice was cold. But you knew, didn't you? Avery lowered her head. Douglas collapsed back into the chair, burying his face in both hands. I turned to Chloe. I don't need you to forgive me right now. I just need you to know, if you're going to take a side, take the side of the truth. My daughter took my hand. Lightly, but firmly. 3 weeks after that confrontation, I walked into the courtroom of the Charleston County Trial Court with a case file over 300 pages thick. Throughout the hearing, I never once looked at Douglas. I didn't need to know how he was reacting. I no longer wondered if the face beside me was still the same man who once held my hand as I gave birth to Chloe. What mattered now was the truth. And this time, the truth was on my side. My attorney, Tessa Monroe, clearly presented every transaction trail, every linked account, every forged passport copy Douglas had used for international transfers. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize. She simply peeled off the mask built with dinner parties, late-night work sessions, and all the sweet words he had whispered into our daughter's ears for years. Douglas's side was weak. His new attorney, a young nervous man, kept flipping files like he was trying to escape a maze. I didn't see Avery in the courtroom. According to Tessa, she had quietly stepped down from Mariner Linvest a week after the Belize account was frozen. No fanfare, no regret. She vanished like she'd never existed in Douglas's world, leaving him alone in the wreckage they had created together. After the hearing, Douglas approached me hesitantly. Lauren, can we talk in private? There's nothing left to say privately, Douglas. What you need to prove is now in your lawyer's hands, and the court's eyes. I think maybe mediation would be better for both of us. For Chloe? I narrowed my eyes, my voice steady. Don't drag Chloe into this. She's already been hurt enough, and you know full well, if I agree to mediation, that means sweeping your financial fraud under the rug. I don't hold a grudge, but I'm not blind enough to sign forgiveness for a man who once viewed my life insurance as an investment opportunity. Douglas lowered his head. He said nothing more. That evening, just as I poured myself a cup of tea, Chloe showed up. She hadn't texted ahead, but when I opened the door and saw her standing there, silent and hugging me tightly, I felt something lift inside me. We sat in the living room under warm yellow light. I waited in silence. Chloe looked down at her hands, then spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I was so angry at you for not telling me sooner, but now, after everything, I just feel ashamed. I touched her hand gently. You don't need to be ashamed for trusting someone you loved. It just means you have a heart. But I feel doubly betrayed. Dad betrayed you, and for a moment, I betrayed you too. Because I thought maybe you were overreacting. I gave her a soft smile, without blame. Everyone wants to believe the easier version of things. I used to be like that too. Chloe wiped her tears. She looked around the house. The one she'd grown up in. Once filled with family photos I had since packed away into a box in the attic. Now I understand why you insisted on keeping this house. It's not about the money, sweetie. Sometimes people need something solid to stand on, just to figure out where they're headed next. I didn't keep the house to hold on to the past. I kept it to declare some things cannot be stolen. Especially when we choose to stand up at the right time. Mom, I'm proud of you. I turned to her. Her eyes held the same light I once had before life got complicated. And I'm proud of you, Chloe. Not because you believed me from the start, but because you had the courage to face the truth when it appeared, even when it hurt. I had let go of Douglas, but I wasn't letting go of justice, or of what Chloe and I truly deserved. The part of my life I once let others steer, because I loved, and because I wanted to protect, was finally mine to protect, properly, with clarity, with strength. The little house by the lake where Douglas once planned to start over with Avery now belonged to me. I bought it on a quiet morning, standing by the window of what used to be my father's study, seeing my reflection through the branches of trees shedding their autumn leaves. I remember thinking, if someone once planned to bury me in this place, then I'll plant flowers right here instead. Beckman Lake in fall is like a blank page. Still water, golden reeds, and tall pines whispering, like they're trying to hold on to the gentlest sounds of the day. I started renovating the house, not into something grand, but into something that breathed at the pace of women learning to live again. Women who once woke up not knowing why they should keep going. Women who were told, at your age, what are you starting over for? I named the place Legacy Nest, a name that came to me one night as Chloe and I sat together, sipping dark chocolate and rereading the notes I had once scribbled in an old notebook. Nest? Like a home? Chloe asked. Yes, but not a nest to stay in forever. A nest to rest, to hatch again, before flying forward. Ah, she nodded, eyes bright. The eyes of a young therapist who understood the invisible weight my generation had carried. With help from Chloe and Tessa, the lawyer who was not only sharp but also knew that healing wasn't just financial but about dignity, I built a dual support model: emotional counseling and personal financial recovery. Legacy Nest didn't have flashy ads. We grew through quiet referrals. Women's groups, churches, local libraries, and a few trusted family lawyers. But every woman who walked through the door brought a story and left with a seed of hope. There was Eleanor, 62, whose son revoked her access to her retirement fund after she accidentally signed the wrong authorization form. There was Marcia, once a bank teller who quit after an accident, then was tricked into a home loan by her longtime boyfriend, who vanished. There was Lydia, who had lived in an RV for 2 years after her husband died and his family kicked her out of their home. No children, they said, meant no legacy. They came, sat in the small oak-tiled kitchen, sipping tea with me or with Chloe. Some didn't speak for the first 2 sessions. They just held their cups, silent, eyes rimmed red. But slowly they began to talk. About names they no longer spoke. About birthdays they forgot, their own. About hours spent sitting in a parked car with nowhere to go but home. A word that had become painfully vague. I didn't give advice, I gave them simple spreadsheets. Here's how you can consolidate what you still have. Here's the cost if you want to rent a small apartment for 6 months. Here's what public aid you may qualify for and how to reapply. Chloe listened. She had learned how to wait. Until someone was ready to find their voice again. And then she helped them locate that voice. Not the one smothered by insults, but the true one. The one they had before someone convinced them they weren't worth much. One October afternoon, while I sat on the porch by the lake, watching tiny boats drift by, Chloe came out carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. You know, Mom, today Marcia said something I can't stop thinking about. What was it? She said it's been so long since I was listened to, not lectured. I wrapped my hands around the cocoa. The hint of cinnamon eased something in my chest. Then we're on the right path, sweetheart. Chloe held my gaze for a moment before asking, almost out of nowhere, if you could go back, would you choose Dad again? I froze. The breeze carried laughter from somewhere across the lake. I answered with a question. If I hadn't chosen him, how would I have gotten you? She smiled softly. Side by side we stayed there, two women bound by more than blood. One who had been broken by the wrong kind of love, and one stepping into the world clear-eyed, determined not to repeat it. On Thursday morning, when the news broke that Douglas Hayes had officially been sentenced to 4 years of probation and 18 months of mandatory rehabilitation for financial fraud involving marital deception, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel victorious either. It simply confirmed what I had long endured, what I had seen but never named. All those nights lying awake, sensing something in my life was being stolen, inch by inch. I was watering the porch plants when a postcard dropped into the mailbox. No stamp, no envelope, just a single handwritten line. If I hadn't betrayed you that day, we would still be a family. No name. But I knew the handwriting. No matter how many years passed, no matter how shaky his hands or gray his hair, I still recognized how he always pressed too hard on the final loop of every yaz, as if afraid it would fly away if he wrote it too lightly. I flipped the card. The image showed a winter beach misted in fog, footprints fading under the waves. A very Douglas kind of image. Full of regret, full of unspoken messages. Back on the porch, I struck a match and held the card to the flame. I thought about all the times I waited for Douglas to come home late, telling myself he must be stuck in traffic. The nights I looked at Chloe sleeping and wondered, am I really doing what's best for her? The moments I folded up my own dreams like tablecloths after dinner. Family should be where we don't have to armor up, where we don't have to doubt, where you can bare your back at midnight and not fear being stabbed. Douglas hadn't been my family for a long time. I'd never had the courage to call it by its name. Chloe stepped out just as the last ashes floated from my hand. Who was it from, Mom? I lifted my hand, letting the wind carry the rest of the soot. Someone who still thinks family can be reclaimed with a single what if. She didn't say a word. Her steps were quiet, but her gesture said everything as she rested her head lightly on my shoulder. When I was little, I used to think if you and Dad didn't fight, we'd be like those Christmas movie families forever. I used to think that too. But now I believe sometimes happy endings don't come from keeping everything the same. They come from having the courage to rewrite the story differently. A moment later, Chloe said, "Yesterday I counseled a 47-year-old woman who just finalized her divorce. She said, I have nothing left. I gave my life to a man who never really loved me." I asked, "And what did you tell her?" I told her, "You haven't lost anything. You've just let go of what was never worth holding, so your hands are free to grab something better." "That's beautiful. I'm gonna borrow that for my next Legacy Nest session." We both laughed. That evening, Chloe and I walked the trail around Beckman Lake, the place once dreamed up by Douglas and Avery. Now, it was where I planted lilacs. Where women once broken sipped tea and told stories of the days they thought everything was lost. Yet, somehow, they stood up again. There were no signs outside that said victory or successful revenge. Just one small wooden plaque with 2 words. Steady ground. Have you ever given your whole life to a family, only to realize one day you were never really let inside it? I know that feeling, the feeling of being treated like the background of a painting. Quiet, nameless, the one no one ever asks, "Are you tired, Mom? Are you okay, honey?" But I also know this. Sometimes, it only takes one brave step, out of the role others forced on you, to find yourself again. Not to start over, but to finally live in a way that feels right. What about you? Have you ever chosen to let go of what felt like everything, just to hold on to yourself? If this story reminds you of someone, a memory, or even your own life, share it in the comments. I want to hear your voice. Because every story of rebirth begins with one truth spoken out loud. And if you'd like to keep hearing stories about family, about cracks and the courage to mend them, subscribe to this channel. We're still telling them, not fairy tales, but real stories, from the hearts of those who stayed silent for far too long.